Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Road to 2000. As always, my name is Caleb Denby, and I will be your driver on this journey. Tonight, I was just chatting with our in-person audience here. We're going to be talking about a special event, the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour Finals. So this is the concluding event of the Champions Chess Tour that's been hosted by the website Chess24, along with Magnus Carlsen, world champion. And we were talking about the rise of online events. There didn't used to be many of these before the COVID-19 pandemic. There were some, chess.com had some events, but these days they are very, very commonplace, and I don't see these online tours ending anytime soon. It's just so convenient for the players to be able to play from anywhere, and for there to be really a lot less overhead. You know, you don't have to rent out an entire hotel anymore to host a chess tournament. You can just have everybody get a computer. But the player I wanted to focus on today is actually Levon Aronian, because he is playing from the St. Louis Chess Club. And so I've had the pleasure of actually proctoring some of his games, and so I've gotten an up-close view of what these games have been like live in person. And so I wanted to talk about them, see if I could share some insight into these games. So to start with, I want to look at games from today when Levon Aronian was playing against Anish Giri. It was a good day for the Levon, and as you can see, he actually won at least one or two of these games against Anish. So let's just get into it here. In this game, Levon had white, and this was actually the second game they played. Giri got off to an early lead, winning the first game of the day against Levon. They play 4 games in a day. So Levon needed to come back rather strong. So to do so, he plays e4. Now Giri was up for a fight. He plays c5, going into the Sicilian. We get knight f3, d6, d4, the open Sicilian, knight f6, knight c3, and now a6. So we are in the Najdorf. And now Levon Aronian plays the move f3. So not quite a sideline, but not the hordes of theory that you're going to get into with bishop g5 in that main line, or in bishop e3 in the English attack. But not quite the quieter lines like bishop e2 either. Just going on with f3. Black now decides to expand with e5 in the classical Najdorf idea. Of course, it's not too late to go e6 and transpose into some of these variations. But e5 is the main point in the Najdorf. That's what black chooses here. We get knight b3, bishop e6, bishop e3, both sides just getting their development out there. And black plays an early h5. So I wanted to at least briefly mention this idea. I talked about it a little bit in my series on the Najdorf, but why is black playing h5 so early? Open question to the audience. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's hoping to prevent any kind of early expansion on the king's side. Now there are a couple downsides to this move, though. The one obvious downside is that it costs time. You have to spend time to play h5, time you could spend developing. But what else could potentially be the problem with this h5 move?
Forfeiting a future castle on that side?
Yeah, so not necessarily forfeiting it entirely, but it makes castling kingside more risky, is what you're saying, right? Because, as we all know, whenever you push a pawn forward on the side where potentially your king is going to be, it can be used as a hook. It's something that the opponent can latch onto. It's actually going to make moves like g4 scarier if you're castled, because then already white is threatening to open things up. And then there's one last downside to h5 that's worth mentioning that I want to just point out.
White can pin the knight on g5?
Yeah, you were saying white can pin the knight, but just at its core, the g5 square is going to be a lot weaker. And it's actually this h5 move that is going to decide a lot in this game. So pay attention to how Levon is using this move to influence kind of his play, and what Anish is doing differently compared to normal because of this h5 move. So to start with, Levon chooses this line with knight d5, which is just one of the main options here. And this is going to change the structure. So now, because we've played h5, moves like bishop g5, as you said, are going to be a bigger problem. So black's not really going to let this sit. You could theoretically play knight b to d7, but no reason to let this knight stand on d5. So black captures, this time with the bishop. I don't think you want to take with the knight here. This bishop's going to get kicked around, and it's kind of in the way of the knight on b8 as well. So we get bishop takes, pawn takes, now knight b to d7, queen to d2, and g6 from Anish Giri. So far, so normal. And here, rather than go for bishop e2, Levon chooses to castle queenside. So we're still in very well-trodden territory here. So I want to put 2 more moves on the board. Bishop g7 by Anish is not the most common. More common is just attacking this pawn directly, and this move leads to just some simplifications. But Anish wants more, so he plays bishop g7.
I'm sorry, could you explain why g7 at all? I don't see, I'm an average player, but I don't see any reason to do that whatsoever.
So why come to g7 is the question. So what's the alternative? Are you saying why not go to e7? Why not?
That's too smart for me, but just why do g7 at all? In other words, I don't see any tactical advantage to it. All it does is, it's not even freeing up the back row. It can get you ready to castle, but it's already weak on that side because of the pawn structure.
Yeah.
So move, it just means to me it looks like a wasted move.
So there's a couple of reasons to put the bishop on g7. You don't seem thrilled about the idea of castling, but castling is going to be a really important idea in the position. And it's good to have it as an option. Now, g7 is definitely a better square than e7 here, I'm going to claim. Because from g7, the bishop does actually have some latent potential. So there's a very important break in the position that black is always going to be considering, and that break is e4. So this is what black is thinking about. This is the advantage to taking on d5 as well.
So the mediocre player looks constipated, and you're saying, no, it's not for the next move, it's for 3 moves down.
Yeah, some sunny day, black might be able to play this move e4, and just to play some bad moves, you can imagine like something like takes, the queen moves, the knight jumps in, and now we see our bishop is going to be working well here to support some queenside attacks.
Some sunny day, also.
Yeah. So king b1 comes on the board from white, and this perhaps points out another advantage to keeping the bishop over here, is if white were to get a little bit too ambitious and move some pieces off, this bishop might even consider coming out to this diagonal as well. Just another reason to choose g7 over e7. So king b1 is a nice improving move, and then here we see Anish take the game into uncharted waters. So I wanted to pause here and ask you guys how you want to finish development for black. There's really two paths you can take, and we'll see that Anish chose one that's maybe not so good.
You could either castle kingside, or you could play rook c8.
Yeah, and that's pretty much the 2 main ideas here. So along with castling kingside, where are you going to put the queen? Just as a follow-up.
c7 is a common square.
Right. So something like queen c7, and then just continue a few more moves. Ignore what white's going to be doing, but what is like black's ideal setup here?
So I mean, queen c7, castle short, rook c8.
Yeah, rook fc8 probably, right?
So you're on the same file for preparing an attack, and eventually on c2.
Yeah.
Once it's not defended, once the white queen is drawn out.
Yeah, so you're putting pressure down the c file, right? This is kind of black's ideal setup. This is, of course, so you castle kingside, you bring the queen, you bring the rook from the kingside into the attack, and then you start throwing pawns at him, right? This seems like a normal idea. But in practice, we can actually check the database, and we see that there are a number of games here. And it's always a good idea when you're analyzing these games to take a look at where they deviated, and look at some games that follow a similar vein. So I want to look at what happened when black followed this most natural plan. So to do that, we're going to switch over to another game played by Anish Giri. This time it was against Lenier Dominguez, and we'll see that maybe this is why Anish chooses the other plan of rook c8. just going directly for the queenside without castling, without bringing this h8 rook into the game. This is what Anish chooses to do against Levon. And to understand that, let's look at what Anish played against Lenier. So he chose instead to play this move queen c7. Now Lenier chose the natural bishop e2, connecting the rooks and preparing for g4. And so Anish castles kingside. We do see this early g4 by Lenier Dominguez in this case. Now rook fc8. White simply goes rook c1 to help defend the king. Takes on g4, takes on g4. And then black pushes on the queen side, but white pushes on the king side. And we can see that after a4 takes, takes. Now this knight is actually kind of trapped. You could, in theory, play knight a1, but that's not the best. So instead, Lenier continues pushing. Black regains the piece, but at the end of the day, it's white's attack that turns out to be more powerful. We see the bishops pointing towards the king side, and in the meantime, black wasn't able to do enough on the queen side. Lenier actually had this nice rook sacrifice, and here white is just winning. So I don't want to get bogged down in the details of this game, because that's not the focus of our lecture. But Lenier does go on to win this game with this nice attack. Now, queen for the two rooks, but a lot of pawns on the queen side, and Lenier goes on to win. This is from the World Rapid Championship in 2019, if you're curious. So perhaps Anish has some bad memories in this line. And, having played queen c7 and castles kingside, it turns out in practice white's play on the king side was just a little bit more active. And again, that comes back to this h5 move. If you're going to castle kingside with h5 on the board, g4 is going to be a really powerful idea. So in this case, Anish chooses rook c8. So we talked more about this other plan of queen c7, castling kingside, and launching the attack. But what's going on with rook c8? What is black's plan for development now? How is it?
I don't understand, because he can't get his knights are completely pinned down. They have no room to develop, because I don't see b6 as really a development. There's nowhere else to go for the knights. This is where chess just confuses me, where I don't understand at this point in the game the difference between me and a grandmaster, because I would have no idea what to do, and they obviously do. The only thing I can think of that's obvious to me is to pin the knight against the queen with the bishop from white, and that's the only thing I can think of.
Oh, well,
But for black to move right now,
yeah, so
honestly, no idea, because c2 is completely defended, so there's no point to put the queen on the c file.
So yeah, from black's perspective, this sort of seems like not as strong of an idea on the queen side, and the reason for that, like you're saying, is we don't have the most pressure we could have on c2. Although just to point out, if we do play some slow moves here, there is a threat with c2, which is we're trying to overwork some pieces here, and again, keeping our eye on e4 with some sacrifices and some attacking ideas.
But if the white bishop comes up to strengthen that defense up onto d3, that's pointless.
Well, you're still looking for trouble here. So it's mixing these ideas. It's good to have this pressure even if you're not making an immediate threat, because it sort of locks down some white pieces. So black is still going for the same type of queenside play that we saw before. The difference is now he gets to keep his king in the center. That's actually the advantage to playing like this, because g4 is not going to be as powerful. Our rook is still here to make use of an open h file. But the downside is, with this rook still on the king side, you're sort of playing down a major piece on the queen side. In that other game, we saw this rook from h8 swing over to c8 and help in the attack. Now, in that game, white was also able to get play on the king side, which is why black ran into trouble. But black at least had this counterplay on the queen side. Now here, black's going to be going for similar ideas, but just without this extra rook. So how is this going to impact Levon's plans? We'll see in a moment. So first he plays this move h4. So how do you guys feel about h4?
He's attacking, he's precluding castling from black. It seems like it's throwing pieces, getting ready for an effective attack. Anything he can do that region, because his queen size castle is forfeited now. it is forfeit. You can't do it now because he's moved the rook.
Right, well, black is signaling that he's going to keep this king in the center.
Right.
So.
Oh, he's going to keep it in the center. So okay. So it's just there's a.
At least for the moment.
Yeah. So to me, it like white has an overwhelming advantage with that simple move because you get to start attacking the center and developing the pawn chains. Is that incorrect?
Well, that's the thing is, I think this move is a little bit tricky because, you know, when you think of h4, you think of, okay, you're launching an attack on the king's side.
Right.
And there's definitely still potential for that with bishop e2 and g4. But I think this move is actually more controlling and prophylactic than it is attacking. It's locking down the g5 square and just cementing white's grip on these sorts of weak squares, making sure that black really can't do anything himself on the king's side.
Right.
And the reason for that is because we see that after Anish plays this next move, knight to b6, Levon is now going to shift his focus. So since black has delayed castling, has avoided castling for so long, Levon is going to say that there's not as much point in attacking on the king's side. Instead, he uses this nice move h4 to lock down the king's side and switches focus to the queen's side, where black does not have nearly as much control because he's delayed castling. Because he's left this rook over here, his position is weaker on the queen's side. And so now we see Levon is switching to that side of the board. So with that in mind, what move sticks out here? It's actually kind of a, for white, it's kind of forced in this position. Well, okay, not forced, but.
Trade the bishop for trade the white for the bishop for the knight.
That would be the other choice, but we really don't want to give up this bishop for this knight just yet.
Okay. Pinning the other knight, and then I can't see anything else. We have a mediocre play.
Yeah. So queen a5 is
I've never seen that.
is the move, and the idea here is that, of course, well, number one, we're defending our pawn. And number two, we are, again, moving our pieces over to the queen's side. Okay, number three, we're also making a threat, but that's a little more beside the point. So the move you have to look out for when you play queen a5 is, of course, this, not queen to c7, but this idea of knight to c4. So we'll see it in a moment. So let's say queen c7, c3 is Levon's choice to defend his king. We need this rook here to defend the d pawn, so rook c1 is not an option as it was in the previous game.
Right.
And now we see black coming out with knight c4. So obviously Levon anticipated this. So what do we think his idea was against this knight c4?
Is it a spike check just to go to a4?
So a4 you might run into b5, and it's.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not even saying that this is bad for white. It gets a little bit complicated, but I think we can do better. Maybe just king f8 here. Black is going to have the extra piece, and you still have some problems.
So not a spike check. To you, is there an obvious move here?
I mean, there's. I wouldn't say it's obvious, but once you see it and understand why it's good, then it becomes very, very logical. There's a logical move here. I won't say it's obvious, but it is logical.
Black bishop to 9 to.
Well, we've got problems, right? We've got.
I'm actually was going to put. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's being threatened. I don't know. No idea.
Takes knight here, but instead, bishop takes knights here. And the reason is, okay, well, we trade the queens first, and then bishop takes knight. And the reason is, again, this game is sort of all about the weak squares. He plays h4 to clamp down on the weak dark squares on the king's side. And then he makes this trade of the queens and of the bishop for the knight to weaken the dark squares on the queen side as well. Of course, we traded our light squared bishop, which cannot attack the dark squares, for the knight on c4, which of course was attacking all the dark squares. And because of that, Levon now sort of gets a total grip on the position. And It doesn't look like white should have much of an advantage here. I mean, it seems like black's position should be just fine. But after the next two moves, it really just turns into a total clamp. So let's see if you can find them. Even if black castles, we're going to see that Levon has a total grip on things here. Yeah, so knight a5. This is the key move. Knight a5, now making use of these dark squares. And this is an idea that if you've ever listened to our commentary, you'll hear Maurice Ashley talk about it all the time. His favorite trade in chess is bishop takes knight, because the play that follows is really always logical like this. You start invading the color of squares of the other color from the bishop you gave up. So we gave up the light squared bishop, so now we invade on the dark squares. We strengthened our dark square control by giving up this bishop, so we have to make use of them now. So knight a5 comes in, hitting the rook, hitting the pawn. The rook comes back to c7, and we just follow in with bishop b6. Now the rook has to come over to d7. And the problem here for black is Levon, all those turns ago, has locked the position down on the king side. Another downside to h5 is it weakens our control of g5. That's relevant not only for the pieces, but for ideas of playing a pawn break as well. We've locked things down on the queen side using our dark square control. We're pressuring a weakness here as well. And black is sort of left without a good plan here. And in the meantime, white definitely does have a useful plan. And if you're familiar with these structures, I think you'll be able to find it. So black without a useful plan, white with a useful plan, and because of that, white is going to be significantly better here. So before I go on, who knows what that plan actually is for white in this position? What's the plan?
To get onto the back rank, if he doesn't castle.
Oh, we have problems?
No, just slight adjustment.
Is he trying to eventually get onto the back rank for an attack?
Not necessarily the back rank. In this case, I'll let you think for a little longer before I give anything away. We had to shut the Wi-Fi off. Use the Ethernets. Okay.
I feel like the d6 pawn is pretty weak. I don't know if we could get enough pieces there to take it down. I'm also thinking of centralizing the h pawn, the h rook rather, and put it on, something like e1.
Yeah. So yeah, okay, rook e1 is a really good move. In fact, I think that's what Levon played. No, okay, he plays a different move first, but
But that makes sense. The e-file to me makes sense because again, he's not castled.
yeah, rook e1 is a good move. Not only because black isn't black's probably castling now. He's not so worried about getting checkmated with queens off the board. But if black does have an active idea, it's to play e4. That's all black has left, really.
Okay.
So rook e1's a good move, but long term, white has a very strong plan to give black a lot of problems. And opening up to the YouTube chat, I don't think I see the answer in there either. So we'll see Levon's next move and see if this gives you any ideas.
G4? No.
So not g4, but actually we're going to go c4, and we're going to go b4, c5, and try to make a passed pawn out of our d pawn.
Oh, wow.
So you were on the right track thinking about this backwards d6 pawn. We're not going to be able to put enough pressure on it with our pieces, but by launching our pawns forward, this type of pawn storm is what's going to give Levon the advantage here. So c4, super strong move. Black does castle, and then as you said, rook e1 is a very good improving move. You just want to control the e4 square a little bit more and prepare for black's opening up of the position. And now there's no time to waste. Rook e8, king c2, we're activating. And again, black has no ideas other than to play e4. So e4 lands on the board.
Question.
Yeah.
To me, white's bishop and knight on A and B file are now useless. They're not doing anything, whereas they were super important before he castled. So isn't that a huge disadvantage for Levon?
So that's not the case at all. They're actually hugely important in our plan. The bishop helps support c5. The knight is actually pressuring the b7 pawn. And at a later date, it'll be useful in helping for a c6 push if we get that far. And so it's attacking a weakness, it's controlling all of these important squares, and it's aiding our plan. So those pieces...
So you're saying that, again, 2 or 3 moves down the road, I'm saying that it's immediately well defended, and you're saying it's immaterial because in a while, they're going to be going pushed, and you can advance the attack.
Yeah, you know, all it takes is a couple moves, and we'll see how important these pieces are.
Thanks.
And for the moment, this knight is tying down a rook. And whenever you're kind of tying down a piece of a higher value like that, it's usually serving an important purpose.
That makes sense to me. Yeah, got it.
But yeah, this bishop especially, and aside from that, sometimes it's enough just that your pieces are safe. These pieces are so solid over here on the queen's side. They can't be kicked away by pawns. They can't really even be attacked by their counterparts from the black side. And because they're so solid, that gives white this freedom to just launch these pawns forward.
They're safe and they're future threats. So even though they don't seem to be activated by traditional analysis, they're ready to kill.
Yeah, right. They're useful. They're not making tactical threats, but they're useful where they stand. So e4 from black, we're actually just going to ignore it and play b4. And the reason why we ignore it here is because this pawn on f3 does a great job of keeping this knight at bay.
Right.
And if we take, that goes away. Whereas if we leave our pawn on f3, black is going to be facing all the same problems here with this knight just being unable to move. So in the game, okay, this actually does happen. And we threw in a rook takes e8 trade first. So it takes back on f3 now. Bishop f6 is putting pressure onto h4. Now the thing is, Levon says, I don't care. He just plays c5. And now we start to see these pieces are sort of making a pathway down the board for the c pawn. Okay. We get d takes c from Anish Giri. This trade is mainly just to activate this rook, try and get some counter threats in the center. B takes c, bishop takes h4, and now pawn to d6. So the upside for white is we got these super strong pawns so far advanced down the board, and black actually did manage to pick up our h pawn over here. So white now has the activity, has the freedom to move this rook around, move these pieces around as well. Black's pieces are going to be a little bit more stuck defending, but black now has an extra pawn. So white's position, just to spoil it a little bit, is going to be really, really good here. It turns out this extra pawn isn't as meaningful as these super strong pawns here. And we'll see why in a little bit. So king h7. Now, like you were saying, these pieces maybe could be improved. They've served their purpose by supporting our pawn push down the board and keeping things locked on the queen side. But now how can we improve them further? Talking about our knight and our bishop.
The knight is now not doing anything. The bishop is intimately connected with that pathway. I have no idea where to move the knight that's going to make it more relevant.
Well, what's stopping us from making a queen?
From getting to c8?
From either d8 or c8. Right now, since we've played d6, it looks like we're more focused on this pawn, because now c6, it can always be taken.
Safe. You've got a rook in the way, and you've got a knight on it.
Yeah, so this rook's in the way. Our bishop controls the queening square, so can we use our knight to...
It's a worthy sacrifice to take b7?
Oh, okay, maybe not that drastic. And not just one move ahead, just long-term plans. White can afford to play a little bit more slowly here because black is so tied down.
Go ahead and advance on a c file to give up that now?
Well, okay, c6 it's going to be taken, and I think our d pawn is going to be weakened by that. Our c5 pawn is important to maintain our grip.
Okay, I give up. I have no idea. Anybody? Help me.
Yeah, don't be afraid to move backwards sometimes.
Don't be afraid to move backwards.
I was gonna say knight c4 and then maybe e5 later, but if you mean backwards, were you saying knight e3 followed by?
So I mean, both these moves I count as backwards. So knight c4 I think is actually a bit better. Now, Getting to e5 is going to be a little bit hard. Like, what if
Right.
bishop g3, for example?
Right.
So what's our actual next destination for the knight? It's a really, I don't know, I think it's a really beautiful reorganization of the white pieces here.
Is it going all the way over to E? I'm sorry, to E3?
Okay, not that far back, not
Yeah.
that far back. But we can actually see the knight and the bishop transpose places here and become even more powerful in their own right. So this knight's actually heading for b6 to help harass this rook a little bit. And okay, I put some moves on the board. I think they were the game moves. Yeah, they were. And so yeah, Levon just goes knight c4, heading for e5, as he said, bishop g3, and then this beautiful move, bishop a5. So 2 retreating moves, but they actually activate the white pieces so much. Now knight b6 is always going to be a threat, and this bishop can even think about coming back to c3 if it needs to put some pressure against the black king for any reason. So 2 really, really beautiful moves there. h4, knight b6 hits the rook comes back to d8, and Levon puts this knight onto d5 now, activating this bishop again. Rook back to d7, and then there was some shuffling involved here, but okay, f4 is a nice and natural move by Levon. It's keeping this g6 pawn from joining its partner here on h4 to support its advancement. And by the way, just look at this knight compared to this knight, just locking this guy on the back row. So f4, black does play this move g5 anyways. If you don't play g5, you play it. Okay, well, if you don't play g5, the question becomes, what move do you play? Your rook can't move. Your knight can't actually move. Otherwise, I have knight f6 with check. If your king moves, my bishop might, again, start giving you some problems. And that's kind of it. You're running out of moves. h3 is bad immediately because of rook d3, picking up... okay, well, wait. No, there's h2 here. So, okay. h3, there must be something wrong with it, but couldn't tell you offhand. All right, I'm going to cheat because these positions are too complicated to think about. Okay, just rook h1, and if h2, we bring our king over and take this guy. Okay, so h3 immediately, not so good as well, although perhaps that would be my choice. Instead, we get g5 by Giri, which is, it's a sacrifice, but it gets this f-pawn out of the way and lets this bishop kind of come back to help keep these pawns at bay. All right. Okay, first Levon, though, plays knight b6 again and knight c4, and now takes on g5. And as for the mystical back and forths with the knight, I think the answer is this is a rapid game, and Levon wanted to gain some time on the clock, so he's not losing anything by playing these moves, so he inserts them. What is the initial time? Oh my goodness. I know they have a 10-second increment, and here, I can actually just check. All right,
I don't want to script it.
Okay, no, it's game in 15 with the 10-second increment.
Okay, thank you.
No, it's useful info. Happy to go over it. So f takes g5, letting the bishop back in, and now h3. And the knight dances one more time to get 20 seconds on the clock. And now king d3. So this is the last step in white's play here, is this rook supports the pawns and stops the h-pawn. The knight and the bishop are as improved as they can be. And so now Levon is ready to come with the king as well, to either take this guy on h3 or to help support the center in some way. So h2 is played. The knight dances one more time. Now king e2, king f3, and now rook h1. The king drove away the bishop, and we can pick up black's only active idea, which was pushing this h-pawn. Bishop takes, rook takes, and now things are going to fall very, very quickly. Our rook is no longer hampered by this h-pawn, so Levon is able to invade and once again use the pieces, finally, to push through with d7, now that we have this extra support from our rook on h8. f5 was played, and now Levon just queens and wins the bishop. And then, because he's Levon Aronian, he can very, very easily win with an extra knights, or an extra bishop in this case. Wins this pawn.
That's what gave him the game.
Yeah.
It was not queening per se, it was the extra bishop.
Yeah, so I mean, it's, winning a piece is enough. So we're happy to give up our queening pawn for an extra piece to to win in the endgame. And so here, Anish Giri actually resigns. Believe it or not, black is probably getting checkmated here, just to play a simpler move, like let's say this. I'm going to go knights f6. And this is a difficult idea to stop. If you go rook h2, come in with my king, and checkmate is still going to happen. So believe it or not, white's not even queening. With the black king in the corner, it's kind of just checkmate.
Wow.
And that'll do it.
So, if I understand this, I'll get to 2,000, huh?
Yeah, if you understand this whole game, you might even get further than that. But some really useful ideas to take away here. So it comes down to this move, h5, first of all, and then rook c8 was the really committing move by Giri. And once Levon sees this move, rook c8, you see him really switch plans. He goes away from the normal ideas of bishop e2, g4, things like this, attacking on the king's side, and he leans towards this move, first h4 to lock down the king's side, and then after knight b6 especially, queen a5, fully committing to locking things down on the queen's side and playing on this side of the board. And the lesson that you can take away from this is, well, yes, the specific idea in the Najdorf, but more broadly than that, if you understand your opening well and you understand the normal ideas, then you are much more well equipped to handle deviations, right? Rook c8 is a deviation from the normal plan. And Levon understands, okay, the normal plan, black is attacking on the queen side with 2 rooks. So now that black is going to be missing one of those rooks, maybe I should play on this side of the board. And that's how you can start to punish your opponent for deviating from the normal lines in your openings. You understand, hey, they're missing something that they should have on this side of the board. Maybe that's where I should divert my focus. And because of that, Levon plays some very accurate moves, finds this idea of giving up the light squared bishop for the knights, and then is able to get this fantastic grip on the position with these 2 minor pieces. After that, it's as simple as pushing the pawns, and then, having the perfect technique is a part that is always going to be difficult, but Levon Aronian had it to beat Giri in this game. So, any questions on this game now?
This game, I just jumped. So, a couple rules in chess about when we were teaching beginners or even intermediate students is the knight on the rim is grim. We have a very grim knight there. You can just explain in no uncertain and convincing terms he's not grim at all.
Yeah.
He's stable because he cannot be attacked, and he's progressing for this control of the C and D file toward eventual domination of the board.
Yeah, this is a very, very useful piece. Of course, what you were saying is when we teach beginners, knight on the rim is dim, and that's because it can only move to 4 measly little squares compared to a knight in the center, which could move to 8s. Right. But the fact of the matter is, these 3 squares are really, really important in this position. So every rule in chess has exceptions. And by the way, an aside about this particular rule, this one is actually not so popular with super strong players. I think there's a famous quote, I could not tell you by who, I never remember who says these things, but there's a famous quote that said, this is the worst rule in all of chess. Like, this is the least true rule that is still being taught. And I mean, in a sense, it is the least true rule because there are tons and tons of positions where a knight on the rim can be useful. But then when you look at beginner games, when they are putting their knights on the side of the board, it just doesn't make any sense. Your knight is better in the center than on the side in general, so you shouldn't put the knight on the side. But yeah.
The other thing, too, something who's not used to analyzing advanced games like this, that several times that once you said your reasoning out loud, it made sense. But for now, I see that as very constipated for white, for lack of a good analytical term, and that black being kind of behind a lot of walls. Like, in other words, the black really seems well defended to me. Yeah. And that it's not active. He's not on the attack because his pieces he's all behind his fourth rank. Yet, he's kind of unassailable, which eventually wins the game in a lot of games. And you're saying, nope, because he has this weakness that he doesn't understand, that C and D
yeah, I mean, if white didn't have this active plan of pushing over here on the queen side, then black might be okay. Like if white just doesn't see this idea or something, then black might be doing all right. But you said that black doesn't have really any weaknesses, but I mean this pawn is big. This is what sort of enables this plan, having this d6 pawn be weak like this. And aside from that, b7 is definitely a weakness as well, and it's one that we're targeting. So while we didn't ever win the b7 pawn in this game, again, we're really keeping a major piece at bay here because of this weakness.
You're tying, yeah, you're saying that because it's, again, what you said earlier, it's tying up that rook. That rook cannot do anything. It can't get off that rank because it has that b7 pawn to defend, because that would be a fatal attack.
Yeah.
And so it's committing the piece 100% to one stupid pawn, and even though it seems like no big deal, it's a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, that's what weaknesses are about in high-level play. It's not necessarily about winning them outright, but it's about how your opponent has to make concessions to avoid losing their weak pawns. So yeah, very impressive game from Levon. All the more impressive when you realize that he does this coming off of a loss with the black pieces. You know, you start your day with a loss, it's easy to let it kind of spiral, but Levon comes back and plays this game, so fun stuff. Now, I do want to move on, make sure we have enough time to look at this game as well. There's really one major point I want to highlight in this game that is the reason why I think Anish Giri lost. And Levon actually talked to me a little bit about it after the game, and that's, you know, I didn't come to this magical understanding on my own. So I had some help on this one. But this game is the game directly after the one that we just witnessed. So Anish has white again. The match score is now level at 1-1, so he wants to come out and take the lead back. So you get e4, e5, and it's the Petrov this time around. We get an early d4 in the Petrov. So this is going to be very concrete lines here because black is taking in the center, and things are going to open up really, really quickly. We get bishop to d3. Knight to c6. So this is a bit of a surprise if you haven't seen the idea before, but white is actually not going to be better after bishop takes e4, because we expand out with d5. The bishop is trapped, so it has to come back to d3, and then we go e4, and this is a simple fork. So a nice tactical idea that helps justify the opening here. So instead of taking the knight, white is actually going to take on e5 here, this time with the knight. We get knight takes e5, d takes e5, knight c5, bishop c4. And then I really like the idea that Aronian comes up with here. So for the moment, it looks like white might have something going on here, right? We have this strong e5 pawn, and it is definitely challenging black's development here. So there are a couple ways to break free, but I want to see what you guys can come up with.
What's black's next move?
Yeah, how do we finish development here? Because with this e5 pawn, it can be a little bit uncomfortable.
My intuition, which I'm sure is wrong, is the d pawn so that you can get the black bishop out.
Yeah, so d6 is a normal idea. And the point now is just that this pawn, it might be good over here on e5, but it's a little bit too far advanced for white to keep total track of it. And for example, black would be happy if we got takes on d6 and takes on d6, activating kind of for free, because white spent this turn taking. So after d6, white is going to try and potentially give up this pawn or just make threats right away, continue the tactical idea with something like queen f3, or even castles. And I mean, you're going to have a game. If black plays well, then black should be able to finish development by challenging the pawn. But Levon actually comes up with a different idea, which is not to challenge the pawn by playing d6, but to sort of force this trade by way of playing c6. So how does this make sense? Well, after castles, Levon is now going to play this move d5. And the point is, we use the pawn to support the d5 square. And again, we are happy if e takes d6 is played, because we develop our bishop for free. And so this is sort of a way of inducing white to capture our pawn. If we play d6, white might not be tempted enough to actually capture on d6 and allow us to develop. So by playing c6 and d5, now our d pawn is so strong that it's in white's best interest to actually take it and allow us to develop with bishop d6. So
Does white see that it's at the end of the game letting the black bishop develop for free by doing this?
Yeah. We're always assuming our opponent sees the ideas and are playing the best moves. So d6 is essentially kind of hoping, okay, I hope that white takes on d6 and I can take back with the bishop. So what Levon is doing is he's saying, look at how strong my pawn on d5 is. If you don't take it, you're going to regret it because you have to move your bishop away, and now I can even capture your bishop potentially, or you go back to a pretty bad square like e2. And then this pawn has such good control over the center that it doesn't matter that you have your pawn on e5. Wow. So that's Levon's idea, is you play d5, make your center so strong that white kind of has to take it. So in the game, Giri does take. We get bishop takes on d6, rook to e1 check, and now bishop to e6. And at first everything seems to be all normal here. We just developed our pieces pretty normally, but Levon after the game mentioned a really interesting line that I just didn't even think about as at my level, just spectating the game. So here, try and find what looks like it might be a winning tactic for white. It looks like white might have something really interesting here to challenge black's position.
The white has a series of attacks that will give it superior position but not material.
Well, no, it looks like white should be able to win material here.
Right.
Or at least, very clearly be better, unless black has some kind of counterpunch, which, as we'll see, Levon obviously does.
Queen h5.
So queen h5 isn't quite enough, because if you don't make a serious threat, I'm going to castle. And once I castle, I think I'm safe. If you take, I'll take. Yeah. So the knight on c5 is crucial.
So what's white's next move? If it's
So keep in mind, the knight on c5 is crucial
for black.
for black. We need this knight to defend, otherwise bishop takes e6 is strong.
So the pawn is advancing, attacking that pawn.
Yeah, just b4. And this is the type of tactic that is actually easy to miss, because you see b4, you see this super unnatural pawn structure, and you see all the weak dark squares, and you're like, I would never even consider b4. But
That's a weak pawn. You destroy your pawn chain.
I mean, obviously, though, if you're ripping open the center with black's king still there, it's worth considering. So b4, it turns out that Levon has a very complicated way to maintain the balance and a little bit of an easier way. So what is the counterpunch? What is the counterpunch here?
Put it on the ring?
Not necessarily. This isn't going to be enough. If we allow bishop takes e6 like this, we are going to be in for quite a lot of hurt. Okay. Quite a lot. We're just losing our bishop immediately. White's going to take it no matter what. Okay. And if bishop e7, queen h5 and stuff. Right. So moving the knight's not good enough.
Queen f6.
Okay, queen f6.
You're threatening to a1 to a4.
Yeah, I think in this case, though, I might not care. I could take on c5. I could actually take on d6 as well. And you might regret having your queen on the a1 square when I play bishop takes e6 and rook takes e6 and queen takes d6.
In other words, black king is too exposed for that, right?
Right.
For that corner shot.
The power of this idea isn't necessarily to win a pawn or something. It's to expose this black king.
Next threaten, what you go on and do? There's nobody else to develop. Just castle early, castle often is the only thing I can think of for black to do.
So castles does actually lose a piece, though. It feels like after pawn takes knight, we would get our piece back with the bishop takes bishop, but now this pawn is again attacking a second piece. So after b4. And actually, no one in the chat has this idea either. Oh, okay, somebody's found it. Somebody's found it. But yeah, the crazy idea that Levon comes up with is actually to put more of his pieces in danger with bishop e5. So the point now is that we've definitely nullified a lot of the attack if we trade the queens. And materially, black is going to be able to regain any pieces he loses here. So what's wrong with bishop e5? Well, it looks like the bishop is attacked by a rook. Obviously, white can't take immediately, otherwise he loses the queen. So queen takes d8 is a natural first thought. So takes. Now rook takes e5 is definitely our main line. This isn't quite back rank checkmate, because we have bishop f1. And then if black tries to regain the piece with rook takes c1, white is going to keep an extra piece for the moment with pawn takes on c5. But that's not the end of the line. For the moment, white is up a knight, but here black is still going to be able to regain the piece, believe it or not, with king to d7 or king to d8. And the point now is that bishop to c4 is coming. And this is black's idea to regain his material. If you play rook e4 trying to stop me, I think I can just go bishop d5. And you have to decide now if you want to stop me from coming to c4 or control the file. If you control the file, I win my piece back. If you try to stop me, I'm actually going to bring in the rook. And I will still be regaining my piece with a little extra here, I think. So really, really complicated tactics going on that, I mean, I didn't even consider. Like b4 didn't even cross my mind here. But the easier way to do it is actually with bishop e7. It's the exact same idea, but it turns out this threat to the rook on a1 is a little unnecessary. And just to show how this would go, takes is fine for black. So bishop e6, a more controversial move than you might expect. So in the game, Giri, of course, is like, yeah, I'm not playing b4, just takes on e6, knight takes on e6. But now, black is not going to have any problems. We have a symmetrical pawn structure. If anything, black is the one that's more developed with the minor pieces. And after we get castled, black has no problems here. The position is just symmetrical. Black is perfectly active, and we have a level game. So I don't want to spend too much time here in the middle game because I think there's not too much to talk about. Both players just stay active. We get some trades. Here, by the way, okay, I guess you just don't ever have time to take on a7 because we're hitting the rook. So rook e2, now a6 to defend the pawn. Notably, Levon Aronian puts the pawns on light squares against the dark squared bishop. An idea hopefully you've heard of before, just to keep them safe. We get bishop a5, and now Levon tries to double on the d file. Anish, of course, is going to stop him. So takes, rook d8, knight out, and bishop back to c7. So again, in endgames like these, it is really, really useful to just have your pieces on solid squares. It might look like they're not really threatening weaknesses or anything, but they're nice and solid. They're not going to be pushed around and bullied into tactics. This bishop is...
Solid meaning they can't be immediately attacked.
Yeah, this knight is very strong here on e6, meaning it's defended by a pawn. You know, white is not really thinking f4, f5 is the way to win the game. If anything, it weakens the second rank and this diagonal. And so it's a solid piece. There's not going to be any tactics against it. Meanwhile, this bishop is kind of hidden behind the pawns, but still very active, controlling a lot of these squares. And so Levon is just keeping things solid, not over-pressing, not trying too hard to win the game, just keeping his pieces active and solid. Giri now continues out with a4. We get king f8, bringing the king in for the endgame, king f1, king e7, king e2. Now rook d5, and now white does play this move f4, so gaining some space on the king side now that the king has been centralized. So I don't really have problems with anything either player has done so far, but we're going to see a big mistake here in a minute. So g6 is perfectly fine, just to try and slow down any ideas. Knight to d2, h5, just gaining his own space on the king side now. Knight out to f3, pawn to a5, and now pawn to b4. So this a5 move might seem a little counterintuitive to put the pawn on a dark square, but Levon is hoping to constrain a little bit white's play on the queen's side. In the meantime, notably, he just hasn't touched these pieces. They all stand very, very well. They're centralized. They control important squares, and there's no reason to kind of move them around. Instead, he spends his time improving his pawn structure now that he's improved his pieces. So a5, and then again, this move b4 is the big idea I want to talk about here. So I don't like this move, and I don't like it because Levon Aronian told me it was bad. But let's try and understand why. So why is b4 so wrong? And to give you a hint to get you thinking along the right tracks, it has to do with what I've been talking about, having really stable pieces.
I see it somewhat differently, again, with my impaired understanding of the game. that the game's not over there. You're allocating resources to where away from the king. You're trying to kill the black king. Everything else is a waste of time. So there's not a clear attack there because the bishop and the rook are both defending a5.
Okay.
So it's just futile.
Yeah, well, okay. Just to get you kind of in the head of Anish Giri here, he's hoping to attack on the queen side here, maybe win one of these pawns, maybe just get a passed pawn, and try to make some threats by trying to push some pawns. It's not an uncommon endgame idea. But it does come with a pretty big downside here. And it turns out that downside is what's going to be white's undoing in this game.
Would it be that it's going to be a 2 versus 2, and there is white has an a pawn, which is generally weaker than the more centralized pawns. Black.
So I guess you're saying if this trade were to occur, right?
I wasn't even thinking that. I was thinking if black were to take, and then he recaptures with a c pawn.
Oh, so you're just saying a c pawn here is better than the a pawn.
Kind of, yeah.
So kind of yes and no. So it turns out a takes b4 is what was played in the game, and it's the reason why Levon thinks this is a bad move. But it's not necessarily because the a pawn is weak or anything. But the fact that you mentioned is actually going to be really true here. The c pawns can influence the center of the board. And in this case, that is going to be really, really important because in the current position, it looks like all of black's pieces are really stable, but white does have an option to maybe one day throw in a move c4. I'm not saying it's a good move now because it really weakens some dark squares, but we have to keep in mind that our rook isn't going to live here forever. If we ever are relying on our rook to be on d5, it could be pushed away, potentially, by this move c4. And so what Levon says is that after b4, a takes, c takes, now this idea of c4 is never going to be there. And so our rook on d5 is not going to be pushed away with tempo. And because of that, I think that gives Levon a lot more freedom to do what he does on the king's side. Because he can rely on this rook to be so supportive on d5, supporting this fifth rank, now he's able to launch his pawns forward on the king's side. So let's just see what happens in the game really quickly. We get f6, g5, and then he continues out even with h4, and h3, and g4, gaining all of this space on the king's side. And then we'll see that he actually finds some tactics to use this space to win the game. When you have pawns so far advanced, there tends to be tactics with you threatening to queen them. So let's do this a little bit more slowly, and in particular, let's look at this move right here. So g5. So imagine this move if white still had a pawn on c3. Then you can imagine something like c4 happens. Our rook is very, very short on squares where it stands, and our control over this g5 pawn is going to be a lot less certain. For example, let's even go a move further. Takes, takes, bishop c3, h4. If you can imagine, a pawn landing on c4 here, our rook is going to get kicked all over the board, and I'm not so sure Levon would be able to hold on to these super far advanced pawns on the king's side. It might be better to actually look. Let's say white played something like b3 here rather than b4, and we followed along the exact same path. G5 takes, takes, c4. And you do have this move rook f5, but now, with your rook sort of undefended like this, your pawns are going to be a lot weaker. And just to continue a line here, let's say.
I'm sorry. How are the pawns weak right there? Black pawns?
Well, they're attacked twice and defended twice.
Right, but it's 2 on 2. That's why I got confused.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just by virtue of pushing them forward. The further forward you go, the more control white's going to have over the squares.
Okay.
So let's say, for example, like rook f1 here,
That's 3 on 2.
and you try something like this move again. Maybe I can even consider taking, and because your rook is not as solid as before, I can still play some tactical ideas like this, but okay, I'm sort of playing a little bit loose here. I'm going to cheat because we're running out of time, and I don't have time to think these things all the way through. So yeah, with our rook being pushed away, maybe just some rerouting is going to be good. And if we try to follow along the same lines, now ideas like g4 could potentially push our pieces all the way back. Something like h3 here, for example, and again, now rook f1. Our rook is just unstable, and so its defense of these pawns on the king side is going to be a little bit tougher. For example, if we have to trade and play g4, now white is in much better position to challenge these pawns. See, it's so much easier when the engine tells me how to attack them. But this is the point. This is the point, right? And you can compare this with the main line, where after something like h3, this is where we ran into all those problems with our rook getting pushed around and white attacking the pawns. Now there's just no way to do that for white. Our rook is solid, it's steady here, and it can't be pushed away. So in the game, we get g4, knight g5, knight e4, and eventually, using all this extra space, we get this tactic with bishop takes g3. Now you cannot take, because I can push, and I will be queening shortly. If you try something like knight to f2 to defend, I can play all sorts of things. Simplest is probably to do this. Okay, if you go to f1, I actually queen. So you go this way, I take, and then I'm still going to queen. So Levon goes on to win the game. There's more tactics here. Giri plays knight c5. We get this strange little tactic where the knight's captured, but we have the fork. And then with the extra pawn, Levon is able to win the game. Actually, he does so simply with checkmate here. Rook g2 would be checkmate, and very difficult to stop. Rook g1, we take, and you actually just run out of moves here. You have to move the rook away, and this is checkmate. So Levon beats Anish Giri today in these two very, very instructive games.
Is that how the game ended with that checkmate? Did you resign?
Giri resigned here after rook to e2. So it's just mate in 3. Not much to be done for Anish Giri. Okay, so we are a little bit over time here, so I am going to call it with that. Thank you all so much for joining me here on the road to 2000. Up next, Alex Yermolinsky is going to be teaching a lecture, which I think I saw him walking around back there somewhere. So he'll be in the hot seat next. Please stay tuned for that lecture, and I think Ben will link it in the chat for the internet viewers. As always, thank you very much for watching. My name is Caleb Denby, and I will see you next time.